चोरी नहीं की है तेरे संग यारा, चोरा चोरी नहीं की है।
चैन ले लिया मैंने बेकरार करके, बेकरार करके, बेकरार करके। दिल लगा लिया मैंने तुमसे प्यार करके, तुमसे प्यार करके, तुमसे प्यार करके। मेरा साथ छोड़ के तुझको कसम है नहीं हो जाना दिल तोड़ के।
कैसे मैं बताऊं तुझे कैसा मेरा हाल वे, जीना मरना है सब अब तेरे नाल वे।
तुझको पा लिया तेरा इंतजार करके, इंतजार करके, इंतजार करके। दिल लगा लिया मैंने तुमसे प्यार करके, तुमसे प्यार करके, तुमसे प्यार करके।
Friday, June 12, 1959. 2:23 p.m. Cecil's Barber Shop, 138th Street. The razor glided beyond Bumpy Johnson's throat like a whisper. Cecil abiding easily Monroe formed with the absorption of a surgeon and the calm of a man who had performed this ritual 1,000 times. Hot anhydrate first, abatement the stubble. Cream activated in apathetic circles, architecture to a absolute foam. Again the blade, German steel, abandoned to a mirror shine, archetyped the contours of Bumpy's jaw with movements so aqueous they seemed choreographed. Bumpy's eyes were closed, his anatomy airy in the beat-covering seat. About him, 6 Barter waited on the board bank adjoin the wall. Deacon Willie Crawford account, the Amsterdam News. Marcus Bell arguing agilely with his brother about the Dodgers' move to Los Angeles. For others absent in their own thoughts. The aroma of talcum crumb and bay rum afraid in the air like incense. A radio in the bend played Sam Cooke aggregate low. This was angelic space, adult ritual. Snorts of abode area men came to be clean-cut, and to allocution, and to escape, about briefly the weight of the apple outside. Cecil wiped the actual cream from Bumpy's face with a balmy towel. Patted the bark dry. Accomplished for the aftershave canteen on the counter. The aforementioned bay rum alloy Bumpy had acclimated for 20 years, distinctively alloyed by a pharmacist on Lenox Avenue. He uncapped the canteen and Bumpy's adenoids flared. It was subtle, a agenda beneath the accustomed bay rum, like article that didn't belong, article that burned. Bumpy's eyes opened, didn't let his face abandon what his adenoids had aloof told him. Lie. Delicate lie alloyed into the aftershave. Designed to bake through bark like blaze through paper. Activated to a fresh bald-headed face, it would eat through beef in seconds, dark a man if it accomplished his eyes, leave scars that would never heal. Cecil's Duke confused adjoined Bumpy's face, approach wet with the berserk liquid. Let me see that. Bumpy's articulation was calm, conversational. Cecil froze. His eyes met Bumpy's. Look, if this adventure got you hyped, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button absolute quick. Drop a animed version area you're watching from and let me know. Could Bumpy accept handled this differently? The beautician boutique went silent. Sam Cooke kept singing, but no one heard him anymore. Bumpy Agee the canteen adjoined the ablaze clarification through the window, advised the liquid, brought it to his nose, and inhaled slowly, deliberately. His announcement appeared nothing. Again he looked at Cecil. 11 years of a brand apprentice adjoined the best accessible allotment of his body, captivated by easily he had believed were loyal. You first, Mr. Johnson, please. Bumpy confused faster than a man his age should accept been able to. His larboard Duke attempt out, effective Cecil's wrist, affected his approach open. His appropriate Duke Agee the bottle, cloudburst the berserk aftershave into Cecil's biconcave hand. Again he shoved Cecil's Duke into his own face. The scream that followed would abode every man in that beautician boutique for the blow of their lives. Cecil clawed at his skin, aggravating to apple pie abroad the liquid, but the movement abandoned advance it further. The lie ate into his beef with a complete like bacon baking in a pan, wet, bubbling, obscene. His cheeks blistered, his aperture absurd and peeled. One eye awkward shut as the actinic crept to join it, and his scream rose to an angle that didn't complete animal anymore. He burst to the floor, rolling, writhing, easily apprenticed to a face that was melting beneath his fingers. Bumpy stood slowly, straightened his tie, adapted his cuffs. The 6 Barter sat arctic on their bench, mouths open, eyes wide. No one moved. No one breathed. Bumpy looked at them. His articulation was steady, about pleasant. Anyone abroad charge a shave? To accept how Cecil abiding easily Monroe came to cascade lie into the aftershave of the abandoned man who had any time absolutely trusted him. You charge to accept what affliction does to a father's heart. Jerome Monroe was 19 years old. Cecil's abandoned child, his pride, his acumen for accepting up every morning aback his wife had died of tuberculosis in 1952. The boy was smart, had accomplished aerial academy with honors, was demography night classes at City College, believed to be an accountant. He had never affected drugs, never run numbers, never done annihilation that would accompany him to the absorption of men who operated in shadows. But on May 22nd, 1959, 3 weeks before that Friday at the barber shop, 2-badge Admiral pulled Jerome over on 145th Artery for a burst appendage light. They searched his car and began 2 ounces of heroin beneath the driver's seat. Jerome swore he had never apparent the drugs before, swore he had been set up, swore on his mother's grave that he was innocent. It didn't matter. The affirmation was there. The arrest was made. The accused were filed. Possession with absorbed to distribute. 15 years at Sing if convicted. Cecil assassin a lawyer, a white man from downtown, who answerable $500 aloof to attending at the case file. The lawyer's appraisal was grim. The arresting admiral were veterans with apple pie records. The affirmation was solid. Jerome's protests of chastity would beggarly annihilation to a jury. Your son is activity to prison, the advocate said. The abandoned catechism is for how long? Cecil larbored, that arrangement activity like a man who had aloof been told his adolescent had died. In abounding ways, he had 15 years and singing sing would abort Jerome. Would booty a ablaze adolescent man with dreams of acceptable an accountant and about face him into article broken, article hard, article that Cecil wouldn't admit aback it assuredly absolved out of those gates. He went home that night and wept until there were no tears left. 3 canicule later, the devil came calling. Sal the beautician Mancini begins Cecil alfresco St in Phillips. Abbey on a Sunday morning. Still cutting his choir robe, still accustomed the hymnal he had articulate from. The irony of the appellation was not absent on anyone. S had becoming it not because he cut hair, but because of the way he cut men who owed money to the Genovese family. Absorption wounds, consistently in places that would alleviate ugly, consistently abrogation scars that served as abiding reminders. Mr. Monroe, I apprehend you've got trouble. Cecil stiffened. He knew who S was. Anybody in Harlem knew who S was, or at Atomic knew abundant to cantankerous the artery aback they saw him coming. I don't apperceive what you're talking about. Your boy Jerome, 2 ounces of heroin beneath his seat. S smiled, gold tooth bright in the Sunday light. Rough break. Acceptable kid like that attractive at 15 years. Absolute shame. How do you apperceive about that? I apperceive about a lot of things. I apperceive the admiral who arrested him, Rizzo and Palmieri. Acceptable men, reasonable men. S's smile widened. The affectionate of men who ability be abiding to confuse some evidence, balloon some details, let a case abatement afar afore at any time sees a courtroom. Cecil's affection hammered. What are you saying? I'm adage your son doesn't accept to go to prison. I'm adage those accused can abandon like smoke. S stepped closer, articulation bottomward to a breast whisper. All it takes is a favor. A baby one. Article a man with your accurate abilities could achieve in about 30 seconds. What affectionate a favor. S accomplished into his anorak and produced a baby canteen vial. The crumb central was white, crystalline, innocent looking. Lie. Medical grade. Mix it into some aftershave. Apply it to a fresh, bald-headed face. And he fabricated a action like article melting. We're not allurement you to annihilate anyone, Mr. Monroe. Aloof adapt someone's actualization a little. Someone who's been a botheration for a company of abundance for a actual continued time. Cecil stared at the vial. His aperture went dry. Bumpy Johnson. See, you're already advanced of me. S apprenticed the canteen into Cecil's hand. 11 years you've been Adam, that man. He trusts you completely. One Friday afternoon, you do what you've consistently done. Abandon this time. The aftershave has a little article extra. He screams, you footfall back, anybody panics. By the time anyone thinks to attending for you, you and Jerome are on a bus to Chicago, starting fresh. And if I refuse? S's smile disappeared. Again your son does 15 years. And aback he gets out. If he gets out, maybe he has an accident, avalanche bottomward some stairs, gets hit by a car that doesn't stop. He shrugged. Tragedies appear every day, Mr. Monroe. Especially to adolescent men with no one to assure them. Cecil looked at the canteen in his hand, at the Abbey doors abaft him, still open, still inviting, at the Sunday morning sunlight that aback acquainted cold. I charge time to think. You accept until Friday. That's aback Johnson takes his account shave, isn't it? S patted Cecil's accept like an old friend. You're a acceptable father, Mr. Monroe. Do the appropriate thing. He absolved away. Abrogation Cecil continuing abandoned with a canteen of adulteration and a best that would abuse him either way. For 6 nights, Cecil didn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, the canteen of lie on his nightstand, aglow in the atramentus like a bad-natured eye. He anticipation about Jerome, his smile, his laugh, the way he had looked in his graduation clothes aloof 2 years ago. He anticipation about Bumpy Johnson, the man who had sat in his armchair every Friday for 11 years, who had trusted Cecil with a brand at his throat, who had abounding Cecil's wife's burial and paid for the headstone afterwards actuality asked. He anticipation about what he was actuality asked to do. To abandon a man who had apparent him annihilation but respect. To blemish a animal being. To bake abroad a face with chemicals while its owners screamed. He anticipation about Jerome in a Bastille corpuscle for 15 years. The things that would be done to him, the man he would become. On Thursday night, Cecil fabricated his decision. He told himself it was for Jerome. Told himself any ancestor would do the same. Told himself that Bumpy Johnson was a bent anyway. A man who had done abhorrent things to abhorrent people. A man who apparently adapted whatever came to him. He told himself a lot of things. None of them helped him sleep. On Friday morning, June 12th, Cecil Monroe woke up at 5 a.m., went to his beautician shop, and alloyed delicate lie into the canteen of bay rum afterwards beautician that Bumpy Johnson had acclimated for 20 years. Again he boxed like the floor, abiding his combs and razors, and waited for 2 p.m. The aboriginal time Bumpy Johnson absolved into Cecil's beautician boutique was October 3rd, 1948. Cecil had abandoned been accessible for 6 months, still architecture his reputation, still proving that a atramentous beautician on 138th Artery could action the aforementioned affection as the white shops downtown. Better, actually, because Cecil accepted atramentous hair, atramentous skin, the accurate needs of men who had been told their accomplished lives that they weren't account caring for. Bumpy had heard about him from Maine. There's a new barber, she'd said. Abiding hands, doesn't allocution too much. You'd like him. That aboriginal beautician lasted 45 minutes. Bumpy hadn't said a chat until Cecil was done. Again he looked in the mirror, ran a duke beyond his jaw, and nodded at once. Same time abutting week. He came back every Friday afterwards that. Aforementioned chair, aforementioned time, aforementioned ritual. Over 11 years, Cecil abstruse things about Bumpy Johnson that best bodies never got to see. The way his amateur area back the hot and hydrate affected his face. Absolution restriction he agitated everywhere else. The baby blister. Abaft his larboard ear from a knife action in the 30s that he never talked about. The way he hummed forth to actuality music on the radio, so agilely you about couldn't apprehend it. Bumpy abstruse things about Cecil, too. About his wife's illness, the apathetic decline, the ascent hospital bills. About Jerome's birth, his aboriginal steps, his address cards. About the dreams Cecil had for his son, college, a acceptable job, a activity bigger than the one Cecil had been given. Aback Cecil's wife died. Bumpy paid for everything. The funeral, the casket, the headstone. He never mentioned it afterward, never captivated it over Cecil's head, never asked for annihilation in acknowledgement except the aforementioned affair he consistently asked for. A apple pie beautician on Friday afternoon. That was trust. Absolute trust. The affectionate that takes years to body and abnormal to destroy. And Cecil had destroyed it for a canteen of crumb and an affiance from men who would accept dead his son anyhow if it ill-fitted them. Cecil lay on the attic of his own beautician shop, face burning, screams crumbling to whimpers, and he knew with the abhorrent accuracy that abandoned comes afterwards certain choices that he had accursed himself for nothing. Bumpy stood over him. The 6 barter remained arctic on their bench, assemblage to article they would never be able to unsee. Get him up. Marcus Bell confused first, afraid off his paralysis. He and his brother effective Cecil's arms, aerial him to his knees. Cecil's face was a ruin. Bark bubbled and peeling, one eye bloated shut, aperture absurd and bleeding. He sobbed like a child, snot and tears bond with the actinic burns. Bumpy beneath bottom ward until he was akin with the man who had aloof approved to blemish him. Cecil approved to speak, coughed, approved again. Corpuscle Celzini Genovese family. They accept my son, Mr. Johnson. They affected him, buried drugs in his car, said they'd accomplish the accused go abroad if he bankrupt into beginning sobs. Jerome, their activity to annihilate Jerome. Your son is in the Tombs apprehension trial. I know. Bumpy's articulation was flat, emotionless. I apperceive about the arrest. I apperceive about Rizzo and Palmieri. I apperceive about the buried evidence. Cecil looked up, his one acceptable eye addition with shock. You knew? I apperceive aggregate that happens in Harlem, Bumpy stood. What I didn't apperceive was that you would let the Italians about face you into a weapon. 11 years, Cecil, every Friday. You captivated a brand to my throat, and I let you because I trusted you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Apologetic doesn't unburn your face. Bumpy angry to Deacon Crawford. Get Juno. Tell him to accompany the car about a back and alarm Dr. Hayes. Tell him we charge him at the brownstone in an hour. What about Crawford? Gestured at Cecil. He's advancing with us. We're not done. The aback allowance of the beautician boutique smelled like chemicals and despair. Cecil sat in a board chair, easily apprenticed to baft him, face captivated in wet towels that did annihilation to stop the pain. Dr. Hayes had appeared and gone, done what he could, delivered austere prognosis. The accident was permanent. Cecil would heal, but he would never attending animal again. The lie had eaten too deep. Bumpy sat beyond from him, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The Italians gave you a choice, Bumpy said quietly. Your son's abandoned from my face. You chose your son. I accept that. He sipped the coffee. I'd apparently accept done the aforementioned affair if I were a altered affectionate of man. Again, why? Because you didn't appear to me. Bumpy's articulation hardened. 11 years, Cecil. I paid for your wife's funeral. I beatific business your way aback you were struggling. I sat in your armchair every Friday and let you put a brand to my throat because I believed you were loyal. He leaned forward. If you had appeared to me, if you had told me about Jerome, about the anatomy up, about what the Italians were asking, I would accept handled it. Your son would be chargeless, and you would still accept a face. Cecil's sobs intensified. I didn't anticipate I didn't know. You didn't assurance me. Afterwards 11 years, you trusted the Italians added than you trusted the man who had never accustomed you a acumen to agnosticism him. Bumpy sat bottomward his coffee. That's the allotment I can't forgive. He stood, absolved to the door, paused with his duke on the frame. But I can appearance benevolence because clashing you, I don't abuse accouchement for their father's sins. Cecil looked up, a bashing breaking through the agony. Your son walks chargeless tomorrow. Juno is administration it now. The accused will disappear. Rizzo and Palmery will aback bethink that they fabricated a mistake. Jerome will be home by dinner. I don't understand. I'm not accomplishing it for you. Bumpy's articulation was ice. I'm accomplishing it because your son is innocent. Because he doesn't deserve to pay for your weakness. He angry to face Cecil one after most time. But you're done in Harlem. You leave tonight. You don't appear aback ever. If I see your face Arctic of Philadelphia, what's larboard of it won't be abundant to bury. Area am I declared to go? About with mirrors. Lots of mirrors. Bumpy's eyes were cold. Every time you attending at yourself, you'll remember. Every time your son looks at you, he'll know. That's your punishment, Cecil. Not death, not prison, aloof the blow of your life. Cutting the affectation the Italians gave you. He absolved out and didn't attending back. The beautician Mancini was begin 3 canicule afterwards in the aback of his own car anchored abaft a barn in Red Hook. His face was untouched. Bumpy wasn't an acrid man, but his easily had been removed at the wrists. Apple pie cuts, surgical, the affectionate of assignment that baton. Of absorption and patience. A agenda was affiance to his chest, 2 words accounting in accurate script. Abiding hands. Vito Genovese accustomed the bulletin loud and clear. The aggression into Harlem stopped. The base cops who had affected Jerome Monroe were transferred to Staten Island, far from anyone who mattered. The antithesis of ability remained unchanged. Jerome Monroe was a peer from the Tombs on June 14, 1959. All accused abandoned due to bereft evidence. He never knew the abounding adventure of what his ancestor had done or what Bumpy Johnson had done in response. All he knew was that he had been adored and that his ancestor bare to leave New York anon for business reasons. They took a bus to Detroit that night. Jerome asked questions. Cecil gave no answers. He couldn't. Every time he approved to allege about what had happened, his broke face would beat and the words would die in his throat. In Detroit, Cecil began assignment as an attendant in a branch that fabricated auto parts. He couldn't cut beard anymore. His easily befuddled too badly, and no chump capital to attending at what was larboard of his face. He lived in a baby apartment, kept to himself, and watched his son from a ambit as Jerome accomplished his education, and became the accountant he had consistently dreamed of being. Every morning, Cecil looked in the mirror. Every morning, he saw the amount of his betrayal staring aback at him. The larboard ancillary of his face was a topographic map of blister tissue, ridges and valleys of broiled flesh. One eye assuredly narrowed, aperture askance into a abiding grimace. Accouchement acicular at him on the street. Adults looked away. His own son struggled to accommodate his gaze. The Italians had promised him a mask. They had delivered, and he wore it every day for the blow of his life. Aback in Harlem, Cecil's beautician boutique sat abandoned for 3 months before a new buyer took over. The armchair area Bumpy Johnson had sat every Friday was replaced. The mirrors were changed. The accomplished autogenous was gutted and rebuilt, as if the new freeholder was aggravating to exercise article that couldn't be seen. Bumpy began a new barber, an adolescent man called Theodore, who had apprenticed beneath Cecil, but had never accepted about the adjustment with the Italians. Theodore was skilled, professional, and asked no questions about why his antecedent had larboard so suddenly. The aboriginal time Theodore bald-headed Bumpy, his easily trembled slightly. "Relax," Bumpy said, eyes closed, articulation calm. "I don't bite." "Yes, sir. And don't use any afterwards beautician, I haven't alone inspected." Theodore paused, ambiguous if it was a joke. Bumpy's announcement gave annihilation away. "Yes, sir. The beautician was excellent." Bumpy angled abundantly and fabricated an arrangement for the after Friday. Aforementioned time, aforementioned ritual, altered hands. Activity went on as it consistently did in Harlem. The streets kept humming. The numbers kept running. The association kept actual day by day, dollar by dollar, captivated calm by bonds that the alfresco apple couldn't see or understand. But for years afterward, barbers throughout Harlem told the adventure to their apprentices. The adventure of Cecil abiding easily Monroe, who had captivated a brand to Bumpy Johnson's throat for 11 years, and again threw it all abroad for a affiance from men who would accept betrayed him anyway. The adventure of the aftershave that smelled amiss and the two words that closed Cecil's fate. "You first, the Duke that holds the blade," they would say, answers to the face it serves. And in Harlem in 1959, every face served Bumpy Johnson, whether they knew it or not. Look, if this adventure hit different, you already apperceive what to do. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and about face on notifications because a budding week, you're absolutely not activity to appetite to absence that. Drop a animated version below. What would you accept done if you were Cecil? Bake Bumpy's face to save your son or accident your son's activity to assure a man who trusted you? There's no accessible answer. That's what makes it real. I apprehend every comment. Let me apperceive area you stand. And remember, in Harlem, the barber boutique was angelic ground. The man in the armchair was vulnerable. And Bumpy Johnson never forgot who captivated the blade. What would you accept done if you were Cecil? Bake Bumpy's face to save your son, or accident your son's activity to assure a man who trusted.